Let's get more on one of the top stories we're following today, because there are stark warnings out for Australians doing it tough. A new report out this morning suggests as many as 3 million of us are at risk of homelessness, with families and individuals regularly turned away from services which are buckling under the pressure. Kate Colvin is the CEO of Homelessness Australia, and she joins us now from Canberra. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning.
I'm reading this and I need to read the sentences over and over again, because the figures are just so devastating. You've got people sleeping in tents, cars, on couches, who have never had to do this before.
Look, absolutely. It's a really shocking situation. I think Australians expect that when someone reaches out for help because they've lost their home, or they're about to lose their home, they've got an eviction notice in their hand perhaps, that someone will be there to help them. But the reality is that homelessness services are just buckling under the pressure of the housing crisis, and often the door might be closed, the phones are not being answered because homelessness services just don't have the resources to respond to everyone who needs help.
And that must be really upsetting for people on the front line, because they do this work because they're so passionate. I mean, you know this day in, day out, that people work overtime, they try and get people into in-demand accommodation where they can, but it must be so upsetting to have to close the doors or just not be able to answer an email or a phone call just because you're so under pressure.
Look, that's so true. Homelessness workers turn up to work because they want to help people who are homeless, get them back into housing, but the resources are not there. So what the survey found was that on 40% of days across a 2-week period, services had to close their doors. And the other thing that services have to do is they have to triage the support that they do have to the most vulnerable people. But even with that triaging, on 1 in 5 days, they had to turn away families with children who had no accommodation, nowhere to go that night. And it's absolutely devastating for people who have reached out for help and just no one can help them. But it's also devastating for the workers who have to make these terrible choices and, see the pain that causes.
In the middle of a housing crisis, in the lead up to the next federal election, which could be in any moment now, really in a matter of months, Kate Colvin, what do you think needs to be the policy agenda now to help solve this crisis? What sort of funding is needed for homelessness services?
So look, we're up in Parliament, a bunch of homelessness services, talking to federal politicians about their policies. What we need to see is more investment in homelessness services. I would love to see every party bring that to the election, as well as investment in the upcoming MYEFO and upcoming budget processes. But the other thing that we need to see is more investment in social housing and greater income support, so less people are experiencing homelessness. But if someone reaches out to help, there has to be a worker there who can help them, and that's going to take more resources.
And Kate, for the clientele that you're seeing, the homelessness services are seeing, what's the impact on children with this crisis just getting worse and worse every single month? Because for parents it's so stressful, but for our little people who don't have secure accommodation, what kind of strain does that put on them?
Look, the biggest group of people coming through homelessness services is women and children fleeing family violence. And if they can't get the accommodation they need, that means children sleeping in cars, sleeping in tents, in the worst case scenarios, even sleeping on the street. And what we know is that has a terrible impact on children. Of course, in that immediate crisis period, they're probably unable to get to school, but they also have impacts on their health, on their well-being. They're often cold or, hungry. I mean, just these basic things. People need the safety and security of a home.
Just very briefly, Kate, what gives you some hope, as we're talking about some pretty depressing stuff this morning? What gives you some hope for people out there who are watching right now?
Look, the current federal government have been responding and investing in social housing. We have seen a significant number of new commitments to social housing. What we need is to keep that ball rolling, to see more commitments to social housing. We're not where we need to be in terms of the full set of investment that's needed yet, but also this response, this emergency response, so that homelessness workers, while houses are being built, can meet people's needs. So I do have hope that certainly we're being listened to and that we will see some action.
Thanks so much, Kate Colvin. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
It's over to